Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin Sinise, and I'm flying solo this week, but I have with me once again my very special guest, Sue from Women at Warp, as we continue our Women's Future History Month series. Sue and I will be talking more about Women at Warp and some of the ways they've discussed religion in Star Trek. Plus, we'll be talking about Sue's own history with church life and Star Trek fandom, right here on episode 30, Woman at Warp, Part 2. Stay with us. Well, this is a very special episode because it's our 30th episode. So if you've been with us for the ride for the past 30 episodes, thank you very much for being with us. And if you haven't been with us for the past 30 episodes, welcome. There are 29 previous episodes you're welcome to listen to. We'd love for you to check them out. So this is also a Part 2 episode. So you might have listened to Woman at Warp Part 1. This is Woman at Warp Part 2. And as would be fitting, Part 2, I have back with me again, Sue from Women at Warp. Welcome, Sue.
I'm back.
Hey, there she is. I'm glad you're here, Sue. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's exciting. I have listened to Women at Warp quite a lot. I've talked about it in previous episodes of the podcast, linked to it in previous episodes of the podcast. And so it's just great to have Sue here because, you know, I get to talk back to her and she actually hears me now instead of when I'm talking back to the podcast. It's very cool. So I will, for those of you who did not listen to the first episode, go do that now. I will still go ahead just in case you're being a rebel and listening to this episode first. I'm going to read her bio from the Women at Warp website. Sue is a lifelong Star Trek fan and has been a member of the online fan community since the days of Usenet, searching daily for new Picard Crusher fanfic. She was definitely much too young to be on Usenet. Definitely. Sue has a deep and abiding love of fandom history and has written and spoken on the subject for various outlets, and she'll gladly take any unwanted old zines off your hands. She's appeared on panels at Dragon Con, Star Trek Las Vegas, New York Comic Con, and the Paley Center for Media, among others. Though Star Trek is her first love, she has been known to cross the streams and is active in myriad fandoms. A New York City theater professional by day, Sue keeps herself occupied between podcasts and work by researching and creating new cosplay and caring for her Clowder, Oswin, Catalina, and Tilly. Find her on Twitter at Spaltor. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you.
Hurrah! So for those people who did not listen to last episode, who, again, I'm just going to chastise through this whole episode.
How dare you?
I'm terrible, right? It's awful. Please tell us a little bit more about Women at Warp so that people listening can know.
Sure. So we are a feminist Star Trek podcast on the Roddenberry Podcast Network and exploring the franchise from a standpoint of intersectional diversity and infinite combinations.
Nice. I like that. We talked a little bit last time about intersectionality, which is just basically understanding all the ways in which people who are marginalized and fit into multiple groups of marginalization experience that in different ways and in different combinations in different places. So, yeah, that's really cool. I like that. And you are all about, I think, something that's really important to us here too, which is inclusion and diversity and all those good things.
Absolutely.
How does one get to be a Roddenberry podcast? This fascinates me.
So Roddenberry actually came to us in the 50th anniversary year of Star Trek, and
Really?
It's a very bizarre sentence to say. We sat down with Rod Roddenberry in Quark's bar. 100% accurate. And he told us how Roddenberry Entertainment was thinking about creating a podcast network and invited us, along with their show Mission Log and our sister show Priority One, to essentially be the, I don't want to say flagships, but like the three shows that the network launched with. And it continues to grow, and it was announced, I think spring the following year, spring 2017. Sure, let's go with that.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, it's been it's been lovely to be with to share this with a group of podcasters who have a lot of the same goals and philosophies. Mm-hmm. And being a network, you're there to help each other, to promote each other, to support each other's shows, to guest on each other's shows. So it's been a really lovely little community we've built.
That's really cool and really fascinating. Yeah. So you had been a podcast for how long? Because you said last time that you're celebrating 6 years this month,
mm-hmm.
right? So how many years was it at that time?
About 3.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it'd be 3. Yeah, if 2016 and that was 5 years ago, that was 4 years ago. No, 2016 was 5 years ago this year. So if you've been 6 years, you've been 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
You were a baby podcast. I say,
the time
having not
straight.
Rounded out a year myself.
Yeah, we had previously, shortly after we launched as an independent show. Shortly after we launched, we were on another network for a little while, and that did not work out. And it was shortly after that did not work out that we were approached by Roddenberry. So it worked out for us in the end. We'll just put it that way.
How had he come to discover your podcast?
According to Rod, he had heard it. I'm guessing, my guess would be through the guys at Mission Log, through John Champion and Ken Ray.
Oh, yeah.
Because I know they'd listened every now and then.
Wow. That's fascinating. That's really cool. I love that they have that. Now, do you have like restrictions from Roddenberry, or do you have like benefits from Roddenberry, like access to people? Because you've had some cool people on your show.
It certainly opens some doors every now and then. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that in general it's beneficial. There is. They have never told us we can't talk about anything, right? And we try to be honest. They've never told us to shy away from a subject. The one time I think anything came up was, believe it or not, on our merchandise episode, because there was some contention back in the day when Lincoln Enterprises still existed, before it became now Roddenberry.com, between the Trimbles and Majel. And when we went through the history of Star Trek merch, we talked about it a little bit. And, that's the one thing I ran by them in all the things we've talked about. So, yeah, it's pretty much, keep doing what you're doing, which is great.
That's great. Does Rod listen?
He says he does.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's awesome. Very cool. Because you've had some cool people on your show. I know you've had like Mary Chifo.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had Diane Duane on there.
Yeah, that's an old one. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, well, see, I have a friend who's huge into literary Trek. She adores you guys, by the way, and would want me to say you are awesome, and she is a huge fan.
Thank you.
Her name is Ruth. Could you say hi to Ruth for me, please?
Hi, Ruth. Thanks so much.
Thank you. She is a big fan of. She actually came to Star Trek through the novels, so.
Oh, wow.
For you to
That's unusual.
Yeah. And Diane Duane's one of her favorite authors. So for you to interview her was really cool. And I got to hear that one too. And who else have you had on the show that's upper tier like that?
Oh my gosh, Kate Mulgrew, just about a year ago.
Nice.
We've gotten a few interviews we've gotten like at conventions. Mm-hmm. So we've talked to Marina Sirtis and Gates McFadden and Denise Crosby and Rekha Sharma and Jane Brooke, all at conventions. Nana Visitor at a con. It's hard to keep them all straight in my head. A lot of the women of fandom, which we talked a lot about the history of women in fandom last time.
Right. Yep.
But we've talked to Jacqueline Lichtenberg. We've talked to Deborah Langsam. We had recently this year 2 of the women who pitched the episode that became the next phase. Oh. Which was a very cool episode. We talked to Jackie Cox, who is a drag queen from RuPaul's Drag Race, who does Star Trek cosplay in drag.
Oh, wow.
And we talked to her. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's pretty cool when you're doing a show and you lose track of all the cool Star Trek people you've had on your show. I think you've arrived. So that's exciting. Well, I appreciate you, beaming down from the Roddenberry Enterprise to come hang out with me on my tiny little show. So that's really awesome.
I'm happy to.
I appreciate it. Well, we talked a lot last time about. We talked about intersectionality. We talked about all kinds of different issues related to women in Star Trek, and how they're represented, and the fact that women really produced Star Trek fandom as we know it. We talked about equality and marginalization, all kinds of cool stuff. But your show is one of those that has gone ahead and explored religion, which is so funny that people think is so outside the Star Trek box, right? But you've had some really great and really healthy and very fascinating conversations about religion on your show. Talk to me a little bit about how those come about, where that comes from.
Where it comes from? Well, I think the first one was very early on. I think it was like around episode 60 or something. Mm-hmm. It might have been a patron suggestion, to be honest with you. I don't remember.
Oh, really?
Yes. The second time around, it was we had been in contact with Blair Monty.
Yes.
And so when we sometimes get guests, we get them because we like the people, right? Sometimes it starts with a topic, sometimes it starts with a person. And with Blair, it was, we'd love to have you on the show. Is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Yeah.
And it was her idea to talk about specifically women religious leaders in Star Trek.
That was a great episode. I have
thanks.
to tell you, we linked to that one a couple of times in our description. I talked about it a couple of times on the show because that was a really, really good episode. What an interesting angle, because I think a lot of people, especially if you're of the persuasion that, well, religion isn't in Star Trek very much, what an interesting angle to say not only are there a lot of religions in Star Trek, but there are a lot of religious leaders, and a lot of them are women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think most of them are women?
Yeah.
I think they are.
The only one that's not that I guess you could call a religious leader that comes to mind right away for me is it Worf's brother, Nikolai?
Yeah.
Who's like leading that tribe through the caves, and they actually take them to the other planet. Mm-hmm. Homeward, is that what that episode's called?
Yeah, that's Homeward. That's right.
I'm just free associating now.
Right. Well, and I mean, you have little ones like false prophets from Deep Space Nine, where you have the two Ferengi.
Oh yeah, you've got
religion
Bareil.
there, and you've got the one with the Balrog, with O'Brien.
Oh, the storyteller guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which might be called the storyteller. I can't remember the name of it.
I think it is.
But anyway, so there are a few little ones like that. But I mean, if you're talking about major religious leaders in Star Trek, I mean, the Klingon, the Vulcans are a matriarchal. They're a very religious culture, right? And they're also a matriarchal society. And I mean, that's the first real religious leader that we see in Star Trek, apart from somebody maybe leading a crazy cult somewhere, right? If they're going to be,
I think that was even one of the conversations we had on that episode of is the logic that the Vulcans subscribe to, is that religion, is that spirituality, is that philosophy? And sort of, if I remember correctly, we landed in the camp of like the way they revere it is sort of a religion for them.
I don't think it's sort of a religion. I think it is a religion.
Fair.
I mean, and especially by the time you get to Star Trek 6 and you're putting somebody's soul back in their body, I think you're on a transcendent plane, right?
But I mean, you talk about religion in Star Trek, and I think you go right to DS9.
Yes.
That's what that show is all about.
Right.
Right? And between Opaka and Kai Winn.
Yes.
I love Winn Adami. I know you're supposed to hate her, but I love her.
I do too.
So much.
Well, okay, tell me what you love. Tell me what you love about Winn.
I know her. From growing up in the church, from seeing some corrupt leaders from understanding the feeling of like wanting to believe and not being sure if you do, or the jealousy of somebody else who seems so sure of their faith where you might be questioning. Like, all of these aspects to her are so very real.
Yes.
And I've either experienced them or witnessed them.
Yes. I found her character to be incredibly genuinely written and incredibly genuinely played.
Yeah.
The one place where it sort of diverted for me was probably the first major Winn episode, which was in the hands of the prophets, because I felt like this is the one where there's a conflict over what's being taught in the schools regarding the prophets, right? And are they the wormhole aliens, or are they the prophets, and all that sort of thing? And Winn raises this big stink. And it was really interesting to me. I was very similar to some things that were going on in culture at the time that have gone on some since. Particularly, where I live in the South, we've seen things like this: religious leaders coming and objecting to what's being taught in the schools regarding various ideas that intersect with their teachings. And it was a really interesting episode, and I felt like, Ben had this setup to try to solve this really troublesome issue, this really tricky issue of how we all coexist together on this station. And he's so determined to do that. And then midway through the episode, it becomes that Winn isn't really sincere in her objections. She's just, once that bomb goes off in the school, the whole episode shifts. And it becomes In the Line of Fire instead of the movie. Reaching back, but it's all about how she's gearing up for this assassination plot, and it just, to me, it was a kind of a almost gutless move, because I felt like you had a really challenging narrative, and then you just took a hard left turn into stop the gunman before they shoot the person, and that was pretty much it. And then we never went back to that issue ever again, because it never was a real issue to begin with. It was just Adami playing politics.
I think when they first introduce her, she's a little too mustache twirly.
Yeah,
but they bring that back after that episode, and she's such a rich character, and Louise Fletcher is astounding.
Amazing. I mean, and that's the thing, because as that character grows, I mean, from that place, which is one of my few episodes that I really complain about with Deep Space Nine, I think it's just the most strongly written series of all Star Trek, before the modern era. I'm not gonna talk about the modern era because it's still developing, right? But I think it's just the most strongly written Star Trek, up to Enterprise. But yes, Louise Fletcher's performance is so multi-layered and textured and beautiful, and like you said, yes, you've seen that. If you've grown up in American Christian religion, particularly, I can speak to that because I have. You've seen that. You've seen those people, and her portrayal is so genuine. And because she is this sort of corrupt religious leader, you want to hate her, but by the end of the series, you have to have compassion for her. You just have to, because you can see how she has been struggling and trying to sort of sort out her faith in a space where she doesn't have anybody to go to with her questions. She doesn't have anybody to go to with her struggles. And she's gotten caught up in the politics of religion. And it's pulled her. It's been this kind of push and pull between religion and faith for her, and you can see kind of how she ended up where she did. And she has a moment of redemption there at the end too.
And she knows how to play the part. I only have my experience, but like I'm a pastor's kid, right? PK in the house.
Yo.
And you learn very early on how to play the part.
Yeah.
And you don't know necessarily why you're doing it. Or I think sometimes when you're raised in it and you're so entrenched in it, you don't even know if you actually believe it. Right? And I think that Winn is sort of like that. I think that she's just not even sure what she believes or if she believes for a lot of the series. And you can see her struggling. But she knows how to play it off, and she knows how to get power, and she knows how to manipulate people.
Yeah. Because that's another thing you learn, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How does that work? How do you get to that space where you don't know what you believe, or if you believe what you say you believe? Where does that come from?
Where does that come? Well, I think doubt is human.
Yes. But I mean, I guess what is it about the religious structure, as far as the one that you can speak to, that causes that push and pull, that gets you. Yeah.
For me, I think it's never knowing anything different, right? And when I started really wondering whether I believed all of these things is when I started hearing other people's like conversion stories. Right? And this aha moment, and this is when I knew I believed, and this is when my life was changed, and this is when I was saved. And it was always, these stories always have this moment of clarity, or like a light metaphorically shining on somebody, or the scales falling from our eyes, right? All of these things. And when you grow up in that, or at least when I grew up in that, I didn't have that.
Right.
Right? There was never a time that I guess you could say there was never a time I didn't believe. But was it belief, or was it just because this was taught to me as fact and there was never any other option?
Right. Is it so? It's that question of whether you believe it or you just accept it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
There's a lack of ownership to something.
Well, it's sort of like I don't believe the history I was taught in school. I learned it. Do I believe this religion, or did I just learn it?
Right. Right.
And it's this extra layer with a faith that, if you'll forgive me for using the term, other subjects don't necessitate. Right? You don't need to believe your English class. You don't need to believe your math class. But as you can know everything about a faith or a religion, you can learn as much as you can. You can research, but is there faith?
What's the difference there? What differentiates? Like,
isn't that the question though?
Well, it is, right? That's why I'm asking it.
Oh man. I don't know. I'm not sure I have an answer for that.
That's okay. I don't know if I always do either.
And I think that's part of the struggle.
Yeah.
Right? Because what does it mean? I don't know what it means.
Yeah. Are you doing something by rote, or is it something that, well, you always hear growing up in evangelical culture, you hear that dichotomy between the religion and a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And people loudly proclaim, right, that at least in our segment of evangelicalism, that being a Christian is not a religion, it is a relationship. But for me, I don't see how you can reject the one in favor of the other. Because how do you develop a relationship? How do you develop what I would call a faith life, right? How do you do that without some expression of it, without some living out of it? I had a conversation years back. I did an interview with a guy called John Michael Talbot. Are you familiar with him?
The name sounds very familiar.
He's really big in Christian music. He's like the number one Catholic musician in the world. He was big in the Jesus movement kind of thing, but he's one of my favorite all-time musicians. But he said faith and religion are like the two wings of a bird. If you can't have one without the other, or you'll fall. And your faith is what you believe or what you pursue, but your religion is whatever you do to pursue that. It doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to be ordered. He said, even if you're a Quaker and your order of worship is you have no order of worship. Whatever it is you're doing. Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
You're not sure how you feel about that. How so?
Well, so as an adult, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I have, don't yell at me. I feel like I have rejected a lot of the religiosity.
Right.
That I grew up with,
right.
A lot, because so much of it, when I looked at what people said in the church versus what those people did and how they lived,
mm-hmm.
it was all fake.
Yeah.
It was all fake. And there was so much performance
mm-hmm.
in the evangelical church. And I don't mean like the band of the week,
right.
at the front of the church. I mean, like performative faith.
Yes.
And it wasn't real. And, where I turned at that point was back to scripture, right? Mm-hmm. And the focus on relationship. And you asked earlier, how do you express that faith? I think you can express that faith without religion by being kind to people, by helping people, because that's what it comes down to. Right. That love your neighbor idea that we talked about the last time I was on.
Right.
I don't need to see you at the pole. Right, I don't need to shout amen. I don't need to sing folk songs or hymns or prove to you that I know every word of the 7th verse of some obscure thing in the hymnal. Like that's not what it's about. It's about caring for people and taking care of people. And I realized that like the things I kind of believe politically, if you will, mm-hmm. are the things I was taught in Sunday school, because I was taught my whole life biblically to care about other people and to take care of people and to help the alien in your land and to heal the sick and to clothe the poor. But
right.
that's not what that's what the church preaches from the pulpit, but it's not how its members behave.
Right.
And I don't understand how it got to be that what they're preaching from the pulpit is so different from how they're acting, by and large, as a whole.
Well, I think it comes back to Winn a lot. It comes back to that that intersection between faith and religion. And let's make a little distinction here, because I think when we're talking about Winn, when we're talking about churches, we're talking about institutional religion.
Yes.
And I want to clarify just a little bit what I was talking about with regard to what I felt like John was telling me, which it goes back to James. I'm not a Bible scholar. I had to look this up. James 1:27. James 1:27, which says, "Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you." Right? And the idea that caring for others, that is pure religion. And it reminds me also of a song by a band called Switchfoot, "The World You Want." And there's a bit in it that goes like this. The lyrics are written by John Foreman, who's the lead singer. "What you say is your religion. Who you love is your religion. How you love is your religion. All your science, your religion. All your hatred, your religion. All your wars, your religion. Every breath is your religion." So going back to John Michael Talbot's metaphor of the two wings of the bird, you can't have faith without religion, because your religion is what you do with that faith. it is like you're talking about, loving the oppressed, taking care of the poor, being kind to the stranger, all those sorts of things. That is biblically religion, right? But it's not institutionally religion, at least not nearly enough, right? And so I think the conflict or the struggle can come when we're talking about these systems that are built to sustain this thing that we're supposed to be doing. That's why I used Return of the Archons from TOS as like the sort of quintessential or the what is the word I'm trying to think of, the template for a Star Trek original series episode on religion in my book, because I think it went right to the heart of what Star Trek does with religion. We talked about iconoclasm, the tearing down of false gods. And in that episode, Kirk and Spock are there, and there's this whole religious world built around this that's dominated by this machine that's supposed to take the place of Landru, who is their Messiah, who is their Moses, their teacher, right? And it's trying to preserve the teachings of Landru, but it's killing the souls of the people on the planet. And so for me, that's the real distinction when we build these systems to try to organize this and structure it and have a hierarchy, and we end up getting caught up in that political system that we call religion rather than pure religion undefiled. And so I'm particularly interested too, being a pastor's kid is one thing. Being a pastor's daughter is another. Talk to me a little bit about that experience.
Well, I have no other to compare it to, but I was a little bit lucky because I was the third. I'm the youngest of three in the family, and but the eye is always on you, right? And I grew up in a small enough town that even if people didn't go to that church, they knew who my dad was. Right. So it wasn't just the congregants who knew us. It was everyone in town who knew us. It was almost like being a weird kind of celebrity, but in a bad way. Because everybody's paparazzi. Right. You can't do a single bad thing in town because it's going to get back to your parents.
Got it. Right. Yeah.
My sister tells a story that somebody called our house before I was born and claimed that she was smoking behind the school. And my parents were like, no, she wasn't. You're just trying to get her in trouble. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I think it was my mom who said, she's too smart because she knows that everyone in town would be calling us.
Right. Wow.
Right? So everybody's watching you. You can't get away with anything.
Right.
Enter the internet. No.
Well, that is a question because I think it goes to how we cultivate ethical behavior, right? And that difference, I think, between punishment and discipline, where punishment, the scriptures say there is no fear in love because fear has to do with punishment, right? And punishment is do it or else. Or don't do it or else, whatever. Behave the right way or you're going to get a consequence that you don't like. And there's one thing for, you can provide consequences for somebody and make a structure, but it's about cultivating a desire to do what's right because it's right.
Yeah.
To do what's right because that's how God wants you to live. That's because it's pleasing to God and because it helps your fellow humans. And in the process also helps you grow into the best human that you can be. Instead
of for fear of being in trouble. Yeah.
Exactly.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. It's... Yeah, there was... for the most part, at least in my younger days, it was a lot of a feeling that everybody's watching. Something that was kind of a shocking experience for me after I came back from college after the first year, maybe for the first break or something, and found out that everyone in the congregation knew everything about what was happening with me at school.
Wow.
Was a little bit shocking. That's probably more my parents being oversharers, right? But like that was uncomfortable, right? So even I'm not even there and my life is still on display. Yeah, and there was a while that like everybody was trying to set me up with people, which is not fun for me.
No.
Yeah. There's a lot of I felt probably. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I felt like there was certainly a higher standard, or at least a little bit more of a fishbowl. Well,
let's at least say a strict standard. Whether it's high or not is, I think, up for debate. But I'm thinking specifically too that we talked last week about intersectionality, right? And there's one form of sort of oppression, I guess, that you get as sort of a pastor's kid, as trying to live up to religious ideals. But there's an added layer when you're a woman or when you're a girl.
I at a certain point, at least the way ours was set up, there was we had Sunday school classes for kids of different ages, and then adult Sunday school class where like anybody out of high school went to adult Sunday school. So I was there one time. I think it was when I was in college, and picked a fight with my dad, who was teaching the Sunday school class, which is not unusual. I don't mean like randomly picked a fight, but like argued a point of theology or disagreed or something. Right. And after the class, a deacon, so, probably 30s, 40s, I don't remember, came up to me and said something along the lines of, in general, I don't think that women should be pastors, but you're smart enough that you could probably do it.
Wow.
And I was like, is that supposed to be a compliment, or am I allowed to punch you in the face? That's where my brain was.
Oh, talk to me about that.
Oh, I don't even know if there's more to say. I was just so taken aback by it. Yeah. And this is a guy who had a daughter at the time, a young daughter. But I look at some of the beliefs or the behaviors of some of the people, the ones I would call regressive, and see them raising their kids this way, and it would just be upsetting.
Yeah.
I feel, I don't know how it happened, because it was a pretty, I would say relatively conservative Christian home, certainly by today's standards. But, my parents let me watch Star Trek. I think they thought it was safe for some reason, not Bewitched, because that's witchcraft.
Oh, yeah, right.
But Star Trek was safe, so it was on TV a lot. They saw me interested in math and science and encouraged it. They never restricted me to stereotypically girly things. I would go out and play in the dirt, and it was not a problem. I don't know if it was third kid syndrome, where they were like, she's not bleeding, it's fine. But, I don't know why, but I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
That they didn't add restrictions to what I could do or learn or be interested in. But I certainly felt that from time to time with the congregants. Because when I first went to college, I should say, I entered college with an astronomy major. And I had actually the same deacon ask me, why would you study that?
Wow.
It's all fake. It's all wrong.
Wow. Not like you're a woman thing, but
religiously. They're going to tell you everything that's biblically inaccurate if you study space.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Sorry, that baffles me. I mean, because like you, I grew up with certain restrictions, but like I wasn't a no bewitched household.
I watched it anyway on a different
sure,
TV.
yeah, but we didn't have any of that in my house.
That was my rebellion. 60s sitcoms.
That's great. That's the sound of rebellion.
Somehow I Dream of Jeannie was okay.
Oh, right.
But Bewitched, not a chance.
A woman calling in master. Anyway, so moving on. Where were we? But it is. It's like, you have certain structures that the sort of culture puts on you. And it's great when your parents or the leaders in your church, and in my case too, don't put those on you as harshly, and you have a little bit of liberty and a little bit of freedom. It's fascinating to me that that deacon said that thing to you, the first thing that he said, about, well, I don't believe women should be pastors, but you seem smart enough. It's kind of like, you're complimenting me while completely undercutting that compliment by insulting my entire gender, right? And I think of the Star Trek 2009, when the Vulcan Science Academy says to Spock, you've accomplished a great deal despite your challenges.
Yeah.
And he's like, Minister, to what challenges do you refer? And he says, well, your human mother. He's like, well, I think I'm done here.
Yeah.
In Spockese, right? What is that like? I mean, to have that. Do people even realize, I think, how deeply they are disrespecting you as a person?
No. No, not a chance, because of the way I'm sure, having known this guy, that the way he was thinking of this was biblically as well, right? Because there is that verse, it's not going to come to me off the top of my head, but about how women shouldn't be teachers or leaders in the church. But you got to look at it contextually. There's certainly, it was not everybody in this church, but there is certainly a big portion of that congregation that was, I would say, more conservative than the rest, like socially conservative than the rest, who were definitely still in that like expectation of, I guess, like the 50s housewife, and that there is one ideal of womanhood, and it's being a stay-at-home mom who cooks all day long and homeschools the kids, and every word out of your mouth is a Bible quotation,
right?
And like, that's just not my jam.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with being that person if it is.
No, if you choose that, great, good for you.
But that shouldn't be an ideal that's put on everyone just because of the body you're in. Does it make it any easier though? When you know that people don't intend to be so insulting and hurtful, does it make it any easier? Does it make it any less hurtful?
That's an interesting question. Because certainly in that situation, I feel like, or I should say I felt like, there wasn't much I could say at the time.
Yeah.
Right, because I'm not just, it's not some rando on the street, it's not some idiot on the subway, it's a deacon of the church of which my father is a pastor, right?
Right.
And even if I may not hold a place in the church leadership, I still kind of do.
Yeah.
Right?
You're in the royal family.
Exactly. So there's only so much I could say or do. You're representing, and you're sort of a spokesman, right? And there gets to a certain point with people like that, and this is true, I think, in fandom spaces as well, where you're just like, you realize that's not a person whose mind is going to be changed, right? So it's not worth my time.
Yeah. And
the person I was more concerned with at that point was his daughter.
Right.
Like what restrictions are going to be put on her for the next generation.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
If you will.
Nice. So where does this come out? Okay, so we're talking about, you coming up in this evangelical background, especially as a pastor's kid. God bless you. Because I know a little bit about what that's like with some of my family history and relatives and friends. I know a bit about that. So God bless you for coming out of that, the whole person that you are.
I try.
But I have a question.
Yes.
On your show, do you avoid the word female intentionally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Female is an adjective. And the only place to use female is basically in a lab setting. So like the female specimen if you are doing testing. So by intentionally saying female, first as a noun or as a descriptor, you are sort of dehumanizing
Yes.
the person. So woman is the noun, female is never the noun.
Nice.
But often you can use woman as an adjective too. So like woman pilot or woman writer. And like 99 times out of 100, you can replace woman, and it might sound weird at first,
right?
But it is the correct way to do it when speaking about humans.
That's really good. I'm going to hang on to that. So, but talking about, the experience of being in the evangelical bubble and in the pastor's kid bubble, and then also the experience of that as a woman. How does Star Trek then play into how you view yourself in those roles and how you view yourself in that world?
I'm not sure I've ever thought about putting them together before. But I definitely think I picked up my outspokenness from Star Trek, and specifically from my fave, Dr. Beverly Crusher.
Yeah.
Because when you really look at some of these episodes, I'm thinking like the perfect mate, suspicions. She is the moral center of that crew.
Yeah.
And in so many of these complicated ethical quandaries, she's the one who has a problem with it. She's the one who has a problem with the one society that's keeping the other addicted to drugs. She's the one who has a problem with this arranged marriage that the woman can't consent to. And not in addition to being the one who has a problem with it, she will storm into the captain's office and give him a piece of her mind.
Right.
And I would say that the church environment for me was very traditional. Like the deacons were all men, the deaconesses were all women, and for the most part, what the deaconesses did was set up communion. Right? That's all you could at least visually see, right? And there were plenty of women in the church, but what they tended to do in terms of like working, if you will, was set stuff up, take stuff down, be in the kitchen, literally, for cover dish dinners or whatever.
Right.
And not necessarily the ones making decisions. So I don't think I had that example necessarily in the church, maybe one or two people. But I think because it was such a big part of the television I watched, the media I consumed, I think a lot of that did come from Star Trek. To give me those examples. And certainly my interest in space and science came from Star Trek 100%.
Yeah. That's true of so many of us, isn't it?
Mm.
So it sounds to me like it was not something necessarily that you were always consciously inspired by, but that sort of came in through the stories and was a little less revelatory, perhaps a little more along the way. You caught it more than you were taught it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least until I do have one revelatory moment with Star Trek. That was, believe it or not, the episode of Thine Own Self.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a great one.
But it is the very first scene. Where Troy comes back from a conference and Crusher is commanding the ship on the night shift. And Troy just sits down and they start like talking about careers and why Troy says something to Crusher along the lines of, why did you become a commander? You don't need the rank to be chief medical officer. And Crusher's answer is essentially, because I wanted to.
Yeah.
I wanted to stretch myself. And for a long time, I had that scene memorized. It just stuck with me. I don't think I could put my finger on why it stuck with me when it first aired, as a probably preteen, I guess.
Yeah.
But it did. And I still sometimes think about it to see these are two women who are at the top of their fields, and they're just talking about their careers, and there's no sense of competition, and there's no one-upsmanship. Mm-hmm. And they're just, chatting about it.
Yeah.
And it was something I don't think I'd ever seen before.
Wow. It's kind of like, it's a scene that passes the Bechdel test, isn't it?
Yeah, one of not many in Next Gen.
Right. But that's pretty impressive. That's really impressive. That's really great. And, who knows how much thought was put into that, about whether or not this would be such a revelatory thing, but it was.
Right. They just needed to, get Gates her scene for that episode and set up Marina's B story, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. But I gotta tell you, when I see something like that, what we say around here a lot is that all goodness is God's goodness, all truth is God's truth, and all beauty is God's beauty. That goodness is good because God is good, truth is true because God is true, beauty is beautiful because God is beautiful. So whenever we see goodness, truth, and beauty, we're learning something about the God who is the source of those things. And so when you talk to me about a scene like that was so meaningful to you and might have been, who knows how carefully it was thought about in those terms by the people who wrote it, I think that's sacred. I think that's something that's God's work being done by people who don't know it. I think that's a blessing that comes into your life. I don't think there's anything about that that's less divine than those salvation experiences that you talked about earlier in the episode. I think that's beautiful, and I'm. This is why I keep hanging around Star Trek, because those sorts of things just keep happening. What is it about Star Trek? Why does it keep doing this?
That one I think I can answer.
Please do.
I think Star Trek keeps doing this because that's its goal. Right? What other show do we have where the ultimate goal, whatever other franchise do we have, where the ultimate goal is to show us what we can become if we work together and are kind to one another, and as cheesy as it sounds, all just get along.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's the whole point. Mm-hmm. Delighting in the differences, not just tolerating our differences, but delighting in them, coming together and working towards a better future.
Yeah.
And sometimes, sometimes Star Trek inspires without even meaning to, Right. Sometimes the added scene that they needed to throw in there to fulfill somebody's contract is one of the most powerful of the franchise.
Yes.
Such as Measure of a Man.
Tell me.
The scene with Picard and Guinan in Measure of a Man, where Guinan says, where the line, whole somethings of manufactured people.
Yeah.
That whole scene where it's essentially like educating him on racism and slavery. Right. That was a scene added to fulfill Whoopi's contract, so to make sure she had enough appearances in the season. That was not in the original script.
Thank God for Whoopi Goldberg.
But that's one of the most powerful, one of the most powerful scenes, certainly in that episode, perhaps in the series.
Yeah,
absolutely. That was essentially an afterthought.
Wow.
And that's what happens. That's the serendipity. Maybe that's not serendipity. Maybe that's divine. In the words of Ben Sisko, essentially, who are we to say? Those are not his words. but I'm evoking that same episode
Right.
of, it can be divine to some and chance to others, and
Right.
who are we to say?
Right. Well, and he's talking about the wormhole aliens, and he says,
Yeah.
look, they exist outside of time. They have all this knowledge. I mean, who's to say they're not gods?
Mm-hmm.
And that's and I would also say to that, I believe that we're created. We're the imago Dei, the image of God. And it's not because God has a head and shoulders and feet and hands, right?
Right.
Well, except in Christ, but
It's the soul.
It's the soul. It's because of who we are, who we really are, and it's the collective sense of humanity at its best. That's the imago Dei. That's the image of God, and we are created to be creators. And when we create, I think that is a special place where we can embody the image of God without even trying, because we're just being good creatures. We're just being good humans. God created us as humans to be humans and not something else. So when we're really good humans, just like a great artist is known as great by the greatness of their works, so we show God to be great by being great at being human. And no matter who we are or where we come from, we can do that. Even if you defy God and shake your fist in God's face, you are raising up to God the beautiful power of the fist that God created. And so, I just think we can't help it. We can't help it. And I think Star Trek is a beautiful place to do that. And I think also it's because, if the gospel really is what we say it is, and it is the fulfillment of our calling as human beings, then when we speak deeply about it, what it means to be human, we ought to find ourselves bumping up against the gospel. And I think Star Trek does that all the time. And I think it preached to you and to many others of us good news that isn't necessarily the good news that you learn in Sunday school, right? But the good news that there is more to you and to your life, that you are created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore you can explore the stars through astronomy, no matter who you are or where you come from. You can speak up for what's right, no matter who you are or where you come from, because the spark of the divine lives in you.
I think one of the things we run into when we're thinking about the institution of the church or the religiosity of it is, I feel like so many of these institutions try to create a guide or a rubric or a certain way that something has to be done. Mm-hmm. And I feel that limits God's power, or at least limits the way it makes its congregants think about God's power, right? And but all things are possible, and the same way we talked about the idea for some parts of the church congregation, whatever you want to call it, that there's one idea of how to be a woman. For some of these people, there's one idea of how to be a Christian, or there's one idea of what kind of faith you can have, or if X, then Y. If you say you're a Christian, then you must believe all of these things, and that's not necessarily true, right? The thing that it takes to be Christian, to have this faith, it's one thing. It's all you got to do, and it's have the faith, right? I'm not doing an altar call, right? But it's that there's one thing. There's not a list of things. There's not, you don't have to be baptized. Mm-hmm. You should. The Bible says you should be if you have the opportunity, but it's not a requirement. There's one requirement. But by the church putting all this extra stuff on it, it also puts all this extra pressure on it that people start carrying around. And I think a lot of the movement of people becoming unchurched, or whatever you might want to call it, whatever buzzword you want to throw out, is trying to shake off those expectations. And that's what people don't need, because it is way back to an hour or so ago. It is about the relationship.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of us who are, and I've referred to myself on the show several times as post-evangelical. I think a lot of us who are in that mode of being, it's like we've left the zoo and we've gone to find God out in the wild. Because God is wild. God is unbounded. And so...
Yeah, I saw it far too often that, the God is not contained in the church, in the building of the church, I should say. Right. He's not only there, he's everywhere. Yeah. You don't need to go to the church. Wherever, wherever 2 or more, 3 or more? I don't remember.
Wherever 2 or more are gathered.
2 or more are gathered.
There I am in the very midst. Yeah. Amen.
It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to follow an order of service. It doesn't need to have hymns. And I even... Scripture tells us that fellowship is an important thing. But I also feel, you may disagree with me here, that there is, because there is so much politics and other gross stuff that comes up a lot in the church, that sometimes that fellowship can be toxic. And for me, it is a lot more valuable sometimes to just spend time alone. If whatever faith time that may be, rather than engage in fellowship with people who will actually do harm.
Right.
And I don't know if this was as complicated an issue, however many years ago in Bible times, 100 years ago, 20 years ago, but it's certainly true today that there's so many outside factors, which makes me think about The Good Place, which is one of my favorite shows. But if I don't know if you've seen it, but essentially the 4th season is about just the unintended consequences of just existing in the world. Oh, wow. And it's very interesting how it all plays out. Yeah. Highly recommend.
All right. Cool. It's fascinating. Well, no, and I agree with you that, it can be very difficult. I think it's why a lot of us have trouble going to anything that says church on the door. Just because, either because you've been hurt or because religion is distracting you from God. Religion per se, right?
Oh my goodness. Now I want to tell you a story. So after the last time I moved, I decided I'm going to try finding a church where I feel more comfortable, close to wherever I was at the time. And I go to this one church, and it's fine. It's a very sort of traditional service, very much like I'm used to. So I felt comfortable in that way. But during the final prayer, somebody grabs my arm. I'm like, what is happening? And it's one of, I guess they were deacons, wasn't there enough to know, who grabbed me and told me to come with him, again, during a prayer. Wow. And they had rounded up everybody new who showed up that day and had us wait outside to talk to the pastor. Wow. I'm like, you don't know my history. You don't know where I am in a faith journey. All you know is you haven't seen me before. Yeah. And you touched me without my consent. Yep. And interrupted a prayer in order to get me to talk to the pastor to try and get my contact information for your mailing list. Yeah. Yeah. Like, what is that?
That's performative religion. Because if a prayer can be interrupted like that, it's not sacred.
I hadn't experienced anything like that before, and I was so taken aback. Wow. I did not stay to talk to the pastor that day, but I think I did fill out the form with my email address and got contacted, and I wrote them back and I told them that story.
Wow.
I was like, this is incredibly inappropriate, and I cannot believe that this is your policy, and this is what you have people representing your church doing.
Good on you. Well done.
It's interesting. I walked out of another service. It was, I think, it was a Memorial Day weekend, and the pastor at that service was talking about how it was a travesty that women can now join the military.
Wow.
Stood up, walked out.
Good.
You know, and like when that's the type of thing that's what I mean. When that's the type of church that is available to you, right? That, at least for me, it is healthier for both my mental health and my faith health. Is that a thing? To not be in those spaces. Right. And I'd rather just do whatever I need to by myself.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I've got a secret to tell you. I feel like,
you know, that guy. No.
No. Yeah. He told me that story. No. I feel like, at our best, every week on this show, we're doing church on this podcast. You know, when I'm talking with Tim or Mike or David or Natalie or whoever's on, you know, at our best, you know, I feel like something sacred passes between us. And you know, this is a place where two or more are gathered.
Absolutely.
And I think he shows up, and it's pretty cool. So, but anyway. So, all of this, we've covered a lot of ground. We've gone a lot of places. And I ask this to you as a woman. I ask this to you as a person who finds themselves at odds with much of the church culture that they grew up in. How do you own your faith when your religion wants to disown you?
Ooh. Yikes. Yeah, no, you can even throw in there as a queer person too, because it's true. How do you own? What was it? How do you own your religion when your religion wants to disown you? How do you own your faith?
Yeah.
Okay, so
when your religion wants to disown you.
Back to basics. Right, back to those, you know, way back when, on my little mini rant that I talked about, that you learn in Sunday school. Love one another, take care of the stranger, heal the sick, feed the hungry, help the poor. The tenets of what we're told that we learn as kids, because I think that's what it really comes down to, because all of those things are love.
Yeah.
Right? And that is God, right? God is love. So don't be filled with hate. You know? And we can even bring out the fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, and patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness.
Oh, that's great.
Faithfulness and self-control. It's ingrained in my brain.
Right. And that's not a bad thing, is it? That's a good thing that you get from religion.
Yeah, I mean, and those are the positive things, and that's what you come back to, I think, especially when you see people who call themselves Christians behaving in a way that is not Christ-like, if you will. Yeah. Come back to those basics, to that. To what it comes down to is loving one another and taking care of people, and not people who look like you, not people who believe what you do, not people who just, I don't know, are married to other genders, not just people you like. It's take care of everyone. We're here on this planet, and everybody's a neighbor, not just like literally the people who are your neighbors who live next door. Yeah. But everyone's a neighbor, because we're all one people, really.
Yeah.
And you know what? Too, I'm going to add to this now because I thought about it a little bit. Part of, I think when I first started to feel discomfort, and I don't know if I would have even called it that at that time, with my evangelical upbringing, was in the late 90s when Bible thumping was a thing.
Yeah.
You remember this, right?
Yeah.
Where it was just, you're going to keep hitting people over the head with the Bible until they convert.
Right.
And that's not that's not effective. It's also not nice.
Right.
And I don't want to be kind to someone. I don't want to be loving to someone in order to get them to convert. That's not my goal. I want to be kind to someone or loving to someone because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Right. And I'm not saying that I am perfect at that by any means. I have a very short temper, and I get righteously angry a lot. Yeah. I'm not always the nicest person when I've had a bad day, but the point is to try.
Yeah. All you can do is your best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And sometimes all you can do is your worst, but that's what grace is for. That's great. I love it. Man, this has been fantastic.
I'm glad.
Enjoyed this even more than I thought I would, and I was already super excited for it. So this is great. So again, just tell people where they can find you and find Women at Warp and all that good stuff. Sure.
If you want to send me some fan fiction, on Twitter, I'm at Spaltor. That's Spaltor. That is what happens when you sing soprano, alto, and tenor in a choir, and you smash them all together. And you can find Women at Warp at womenatwarp.com, or Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Women at Warp. And if you are a cat person and would like photos of my animals, check them out on Instagram at Noodle Bean Potato.
Why is it Noodle Bean Potato?
Those are their nicknames.
Oh, got it.
One of them's a noodle, one of them's a bean, and one of them's a potato.
That is brilliant. I love it. Well, Sue, thank you so much for being here. It has been an absolute delight and pleasure. And I just thank you for what you do over at Women at Warp. It means a lot to us here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, folks, next week I'm going to have as my guest author, activist, and historian Blair Imani. You heard us mention her earlier this episode. I actually heard of her on Women at Warp, so thanks, Women at Warp, for that. She's going to be coming here to talk to us about religious inclusion in Star Trek, about how she sees her Muslim faith reflected in Star Trek, and her really cool Geordi cosplay, among other things. It's going to be really cool. Please join us for that. In the meantime, please like, share, rate, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to send us your questions. Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to answer your question on the show. You can now also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast, or search Gospel According to Star Trek on Patreon. You will find us there. We have lots of cool perks for you there, and we would really appreciate any support you can give the show. You can join for as little as $1 a month and get access to some really cool extra content and stuff. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, I'm Kevin Senes. My guest has been Sue from Women at Warp. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.